Hello, everyone. You will notice this is not the usual background for Sentinels of Senior Year. And that's because after episode 5, where episode 6 started, which is called Lightning Sonata, I embarked upon a trilogy of episodes called the Term Paper Trilogy. Actually, I can just get out of the way just a little bit so you can kind of see it. Um, but the Term Paper Trilogy took place kind of as the center of season two, Sentinels of Senior Year, as the living smoke or the fog was getting thicker in Angel Grove. And in these three episodes, there's going to be some familiar things that happen, things that are referenced in Power Rangers Rise, things that are going to affect what happens in season three. And even though I'm here by myself telling the story as the GM, I'm using some transcripts from the original episodes to sort of piece together to make sure that all of the current four Rangers at that point on Zordon's side get to really tell their story. And the fifth Ranger, of course. Um, but if you're keeping up with the series, you know that things in Angel Grove at this point are really bad. At one point, I'm going to reference the fact that you no longer need the Hagstones to see the smoke. And in fact, there's been smoke that is getting progressive to the point where it's sort of like a frog in a pot of boiling water. Um, the one thing these rangers have accomplished is they did start to find the marbles that go along with the boxes. At this point, they have, red and at least blue. And of course, the marbles are based upon, um, I'm going to butcher this, Zeoger. Sure, I'm butchering that. And the Sentinels here have a lot to do with the series and a bigger part of mythology of Angel Grove. It's always important to me as the GM to think about Angel Grove not necessarily as the center of the universe, but for those of us that love the Power Rangers, it's the place where they really first started to appear. Not that we don't love, you know, Corinth, and not that we don't love Amber Beach, not that we don't love Stone Canyon and things like that, but Angel Grove always kind of holds a place in our heart. So we're going to do the Term Paper Trilogy for you. This is obviously going to be shorter than the 3 hour, 3.5 hour long episodes that they were originally. I'm going to cut down the combat to its kind of most important aspects. But I think you're going to get a lot out of it. Cecily, Eddie, Jane, and Brick go through a lot in these three episodes, and their allies do too. So I'm excited to share with you. So, and this was fun too, because I always like this idea that these Rangers are sort of stuck in school. This is the first part of taking them out of that school, taking them out of that structure, but still keeping them as Rangers, still keeping them in Angel Grove, more or less. You'll see. Because I'm going to be doing this for after Term Paper Trilogy. There's 4 or 5 episodes left. So I'm going to do another video for that. And then, of course, I'm going to do season three, Corrupted. And I want to do all this not just to honor the work that was done, but also because it's one really big connected story. So everything that you see that happened in Becoming Mighty and Morphin, the things you happen to see here in Sentinel of Senior Year, the things in Corrupted, um, the things that happen in Centurion Ridge, the things happening in Rise, they're all actually connected into one story that I started telling as I was writing season three. So I didn't always know it was going to come to the point that it came to, but the cast really seemed to enjoy being part of this. And really, it was just the fact that time and finances and lives were just not available to keep doing at the pace we were. Um, but if we ever come back to it, of course, I want you all to be the first to know, and I want to make sure you're all caught up on where the story is. If you've been tuning into Power Rangers Rise, you're actually, or even Centurion, you're going to notice a few things. And I think that'll make the world richer for it. But enough babbling. So let's do episode 6 is called Lightning Sonata. Um, Episode 6 starts on another lovely Monday morning at Angel Grove High. So when they arrived at school, the now seniors are all told they need to report to their homeroom class for instruction, no matter what their actual first period class is. Anyone with small town roots would have been anticipating this. This is the seventh year this has happened. And this is from the brain of Principal Kaplan, sort of the way that he wants to leave his legacy is the reason we call it the Term Paper Trilogy is because Principal Kaplan has created this full, fully cited 20-page MLA style paper that every student that is a senior at Angel Grove High has to do in order to graduate. If they don't do the paper to some sort of grade expectation, they won't walk, they won't graduate, they'll have to repeat senior year until they do it and do it right, quote unquote. So on top of rangering duty, I made the poor ranger just have to decide what they wanted to do their paper on. And that's going to be kind of left to the mystery of time and comments. If you think you have an idea of what Brick, Cecily, Jane, and Eddie would do for papers, please give them in comments. I will let you know Brick does not get a choice. The athletic office has a vested interest in all of the athletes doing papers on athletic topics. So Brick doesn't actually get to choose what he does his paper on. Shortly after homeroom, he has to go to a meeting with all the other senior athletes, and he's literally the only person that understands the assignment. And he has to sort of convince people so he can actually just get out of the meeting that never ends. Which sort of makes me chuckle because John, who played Brick, got it right away, and just like the NPCs did not get it. They did not roll really well. What this does is this sort of, though it does constrict the Ranger students, it also does sort of free them a little bit. Because one thing that the term paper does allow for is you get one day where you can go access the resources at the bigger Angel Grove library system, and it has its own ILL, interlibrary loan, because Angel Grove is such a big Californian style city. I think that it's sort of supposed to be nestled somewhere between LA and San Fran or LA and San Diego. It's obviously never mentioned, and obviously a lot of the screenshots of Angel Grove are very, very Californian when they don't look suspiciously Japanese. But I always think about it as that it would have its own ILL because it has so many options for colleges. If they can't get it in Angel Grove, they can certainly get it from like one of the cities up the UC chain, I'm sure. So this is where the start of the freedom happens, where the Rangers aren't going to be defined as much by their time in high school. They will be because they are still in high school, but they're not really. This is the start where it starts to pull away from that, where that structure starts to get peeled a little bit. And a person that feels that kind of acutely is Jane, and then surprisingly Cecily. Jane is the winner of the test, is has stakes in this still because she could still be forced to repeat when she's already starting to think about the Art Institute. Cecily is sort of a free spirit. Um, really doesn't come organically by the structure of the American school system anyways, so it's not as big a deal. But Jane and Eddie are going to end up going together to the library using Jane's pass because she can take a friend, and Eddie's like, fine, that's fine. And then Cecily and Brooke will catch up. But one thing that does happen that is kind of strange is that Latour Finn, and Latour is the surfer voiced guy, the kind of cryptic ally that runs the tea shop on Restaurant Row, the one that has the tarot cards, the one that seems to know at least a lot about the ley lines, if not about Rangerdom, without ever specifically saying anything about Rangerdom. Um, and so before they go to lunch, because that's also something they're going to do. They're going to go get sushi together, which they don't do enough. Um, they find Latour, and Latour is doing something that looks a lot like busking. Busking is the practice of performing an art on the sidewalk or on the street or something, usually to make money. If you see like a guy that is pretending to be a robot or a person like in a piano, if you're in Santa Barbara, California or something, that's busking. And so they find Latour, but Latour he doesn't have a hat out, so he's not collecting money. He's literally just playing a violin. He's quite good at it, but the music he's playing feels very somber and feels very out of character for him. It doesn't feel fun or surfery. Um, it just feels very kind of morose and painfully sad. And Cecily, of course, is the first to approach because they are very kindred spirits. Um, but he's friendly with all of the Rangers when they see him. Brick is not going to see him because he's going to arrive to lunch late. But what it boils down to is that Latour is trying to play out the blues. He knows something is happening, but he doesn't know what. And he's cagey with the Rangers, but he's cagey because things are bad, but no one has enough tangible evidence outside of Quentin's disappearance to know why things are bad. I never explain whether he has a hagstone or not currently. The hagstone that Luna left to the Rangers after she left town in episode 2 is with Cecily, but we're getting to the point where you don't need the hagstone anymore to actually see the smoke. Cecily will use it once in this episode later, when they've left Angel Grove to wherever they're going, which I will explain in a moment. But the so Latour's not doing well. And in the library and at lunch, the Rangers now all together sort of discuss this. There's some really colorful secondary information about the sushi place has something called a Ranger roll set. So each Ranger has a portion of a roll, or there's 5 different rolls that are smaller. So it's actually something they can order where like people are acknowledging the work they do in town, which is super cool. Also, the meal of the day at school was Salisbury steak, which was in air quotes because it's really more like an onion with gravy on it. Because even the Angel Grove school system isn't paying enough for food. Um, yeah, so they have this discussion and they decide, some have done some research and Brooks is mildly unenthused about the whole paper anyways, but it's the idea of like something is wrong with Latour. And of course, it's not just Latour, something is wrong everywhere, really. Um, so they end up going to the tea shop. And the first thing that Latour notices is the absence of Quentin. He doesn't say much about it. It's more like the offhand, oh, you're missing someone comment. But that has been going on for a while. People are really starting to notice Quentin isn't there. And of course, there's a subplot about Eddie spending most school mornings outside Quentin's house with an extra cup of coffee, hoping Quentin will leave the house, hoping that he'll just come back at some point. I'm in my feels about this too for what I know is going on with Quentin and what I know will happen in the future, and I am sad and excited to share that with you whenever we get there. But so Latour is trying to make tea for them in the present day, but whenever Latour makes the tea, there's not spillage. It doesn't get funny, but there's something obviously wrong with his hands. He's very distracted. His hands are shaking. And he has Cecily draw a tarot card for him because Cecily is the one that would most likely do that anyway. So Cecily turns over a tarot card, and it's the Tower card, but the Tower card doesn't have a tower in it. It's just that thundering night sky background, which is weird. Because his tarot deck has always had a tower in the Tower card. Um, Someone else draws a card, and Brick draws a card, and Brick kind of stops in the drawing of the card because the card itself is the 4-H stand. It's the salt flatlands of Angel Grove, which is not the same direction as St. Honore, not quite where Area 52 is, but is sort of more in the deserty. It's really hard. The geography of Angel Grove is really hard because it has to be kind of tight because it has to account for wherever the command center is and where Area 52 is. So I can't actually tell you exactly where it is. If there's an airport, it's probably to the right of the airport, and then the command center is like up somewhere, and then we'll say Area 52 is down or it's flipped. It's outside of town. That's the point. But the reason that this is noticed uh, by Brick is because he was trapped by Goldar there for a while Scorpina was being created. So Brick is very aware of that location, and it's weird that it is on a card in a tarot deck that didn't necessarily normally appear. I believe it's Eddie that pulls the Fool card, but the Fool card doesn't have a fool in it. It just has that background, except instead of sunflowers, it's corn, which reminds him of the corn maze. Um, all signs are kind of pointing that they need to be able to go back to the Saltlands, that there was either something they missed there or something important. And of course, this is the scene of one of Brick's greatest heartbreaks is losing his teammate he was charged with keeping safe and his teammate's mom becoming Scorpina. It wasn't a good season for the Lee family. It really wasn't. So they end up going because they don't really have anything else to do that day. Nothing really important. This is more important. Um, Also, because if they left something behind, uh, it doesn't take long for me to jog Eddie's memory. Because if you go back and listen to the episode, he actually goes into the corn maze that's with the 4-H fair, and there is a little golden, what he thinks is a pumpkin at the time. But what he in memory looks at it, and when I jog his memory as a GM, was actually a golden marble that was like the prize at the center of that maze. And if they picked it up, the episode would have gone in a completely different direction. Still would have had the same creepiness. Um, and for those of you that have just tuned in to Rise, you know my level of creepy kind of can get up there when I want to. So a few things to know about the Flatlands at this point is that the Flatlands are like hot. When you land, you can feel the heat, and this is where Cecily uses the Hagstone, I think for the last time in the series at this point, because the fog is not descending. The fog is ascending from the Earth here. It is sort of like steam heat, if you will, coming up from the ground, and it is not thick in a traditional sense, but it creates a sort of humidity in and of itself. It is like you need a Gatorade right away, I think Brick says in the episode. And so they end up going into the corn maze, and while everything else is has been sort of abandoned and left derelict, like there are still stalls that have been in the 4-H that were half broken by Goldar and Scorpina. Um, there's a reference there to Mr. Kruger and the fact that Brick knows something is up with him, but um, no one really knows what is up with with the with people like Mr. Kruger who are starting to show kind of secondary rangering things, like with the green lightning that flashed on his forearms when he was trying to save the students from Goldar. Because Mr. Kruger is mortal as far as the Rangers are aware. It's sort of like Dr. Amy Whitaker Scott and Latour, where there are people that are allies, but they have something special about them. Ernie would be in that league, I think, like that. There's a reason that the first marble, um, the fire sword, was found in Ernie's juice bar, and not just because we all love Ernie's juice bar. Um, so everything is dilapidated except for this corn maze. And this corn maze is still pristine. It's not any cooler in the space. It's not in a bubble, but it is still pristine. The corn has not been touched, but the corn hasn't also deteriorated the way that corn would either, especially in the humidity. The Rangers do not notice as they enter the corn maze that corn stalks grow behind them and block the exit. But as I tell them later, it was literally just corn. So when one of them crashes through later to exit, it's just like, yes, it was the anticlimactic, the door is just a door thing from all D&D campaigns. Um, yeah, but they get to the center of the maze without any issue because that wasn't the combat. But they do come to the Golden Marble. And now they have, I think this at this point, this is their third, because they have the fire lion, the tidal shark, um, which was the reveal about Skull and the shark mascot of the Inchgrove Fire Department and Skull's dad being a fire captain. Um, and now they have a gold marble, and they have the boxes for these things too. They do find the boxes. Um, and they also have the green marble, but I don't know if they have the green box yet. Maybe they do. I can't quite remember. They're gonna get all five of them. That's the point. So they get this. They get the golden marble, and this marble does fit into a box that's going to reveal the Song of the Savannah, which is this. I call it the Lightning Sonata because it is a lightning violin. Jane decides to test this one out. It does give Jane gold braiding piping, which the other ones have done, like the fire gives a red braid, and of course the tidal shark gives a light blue braid. Um, yeah, and so they have to fight what I am calling zombie grannies. Um, there was an ongoing little thing if you go back, and I think it's in the first five episodes, at least after they've left the 4-H fair, of where there's this radio report where something has gone wrong at like the nursing home outside of town, which is close to the Saltlands, and that is reference to this. And basically, what has happened is that these grannies are there's no people inside of them anymore. They are, I call them the zombie grannies because they're like husks of humans. And these husks of humans are terrifying, and they're holding jars of some kind. When Brick is able to shoot them and get that range shot from afar and takes down three out of the eight or nine of them, they do go down, but inside of them is just this black smoke that erupts from them and dissipates. And there's some weird, mysterious liquid that's in their jar that they're holding. And they have like tongues that come out, and it's very, very body horror, don't go in the corn maze sort of thing. But they do, and they do. So they have to face it. It's easier when you're a ranger. It's also easier because in their ranger shoot, they're less affected by the smoke, especially when they've activated their sentinel. And what's nice about these sentinels that I tried to push them to was to actually trade the marbles and see what they liked. And they did that a little bit, which was really nice, except for Cecily. She was always using the fire sword, which, apropos. I don't blame a chain fire sword. Who wouldn't want to use that? Um, so these zombie grannies, they defeat them, but in the defeating of them, Jane uses the violin three times, and without knowing exactly what has happened, the violin sonata spell is activated, and they actually get a peek into the world that Brick went into. They get a peek into the black and white wandering blight. What they've enacted is a spell that actually calls on Elvestris, which is the locked away shadow persona of Rita, which is more of her good side, as opposed to a shadow persona, which is most people's bad side. Of Estrus, Rita's shadow persona is her good side that lives in the Wandering Blight, locked away or separated for unknown reasons. Um, and it is scary because one, she notices Quentin missing almost immediately and asks about him because that was a big part of the Are You Happy episode from season one, where Quentin had to refute that office work, that thing that would have given him a solid job instead of something passionate, which is a real thing because Quentin is a character built upon economic sorrow and hardship, essentially, and not letting people in because of that in some ways. And Elvestris remembers Brick because Brick was just in the Wandering Blight, or maybe he was in it a year ago. It's actually hard to say because time moves differently in the Wandering Blight for a couple of reasons. Not just because it's based on Return to Oz. So the thing that is a little terrifying is that Elvestris kind of looks around the world as it is and just refuses to help. She can see something um, as this battle has ended, and she's just looking around, not the zombie grannies that have been defeated, but something has happened to Angel Grove, even to the outskirts here. And she's like, no, I'm not getting involved in this. And what she does is she ends the spell and ends it without explaining what is happening. She is not help, and also um, doesn't come when called again. Like if the spell gets activated again, if they end up using Lightning Sonata, they don't end up using Lightning Sonata another three times for it to happen. So I'm curious what would have happened because I wrote it, but they never activated it. So I'm not actually sure what Elvestris would have necessarily told them, if anything. And of course, the question is can you trust Rita's good side? If that is her good side, because what else in the Wandering Blight is good? Even though it's literally black and white, one never knows. So that was Lightning Sonata. So even though they don't have answers, they're getting much closer to having full protection and having a new set of power weapons. Um, and understanding that Angel Grove also just wants to protect itself. This next episode, The Sting of the Scorpion, continues the lore of Scorpina. So the lore of Scorpina takes a little bit of chasing to get to, and this episode is actually a really cool episode for Eddie and Bulk, who have sort of been growing closer because Eddie is taking Metal Shop with Bulk. Bulk has been quite lonely because Skull is missing, and we find out some interesting information about Bulk in this episode, and that he is dyslexic and that he has been working really hard on his term paper with his mom, but he has a meltdown when the entire senior class is accused of plagiarism. Principal Kaplan, who is being influenced by the fog as much as by his own personality, um, absolutely calls them all into the little library at Angel Grove High and tears them a new one, wants them to sign contracts stating that if they're caught plagiarizing, that such and such will happen to them, they won't get to graduate. All of the dangerous pain he can inflict, and it even includes Jane because of her winning the test and even trying to say that he can, influence that. Well, maybe she'd have to start a year later. Maybe it would break her scholarship that she'd won. It's hard to say. The idea is that it is crowded, it's pressurized. There are people there Kaplan has brought in that are not recognized teachers. The usual librarian is not there. So there's this very big like outcry from the students, the injustice of this, because you're telling 17, 18-year olds that they need to sign this contract or they don't get to leave. Like there's a point where he like brings out um a sleeping bag or something like that. It's very much that he's trying to make a point and be very showy about it. Uh, Most of the Rangers, I think I informed them later on that part of this is that Kaplan has been influenced by the fog, and Cecily's going to see it as she's left the meeting. Brick and Bulk are two of the only people to actually sign the contract. One, because Brick doesn't care about it. He doesn't believe it can be upheld, so he just signs it because then you get to leave the room, and he doesn't care about the contract. Bulk signs it in great anger and then essentially punches a locker after he signed it. And this is part of Bulk not knowing how to control his emotions. Like he basically screams that he's dyslexic at Jane, and then Brick tries trying to protect Jane, and Eddie's trying to calm him down. And he sort of walks away after this tantrum, and it's actually quite a dangerous tantrum. But it's clear that this like ploy of Kaplan's has really affected him. Um, The great thing is that it does give the Rangers the ability to split up and do a little digging about this idea of plagiarism. Um, in that there's something going on at Angel Grove High that they've missed in the time they've been doing rangering. So what has been happening at Angel Grove High, as Cecily finds out, because Cecily goes to talk to Mrs. Appleby, who's very reasonable normally, but he's been a little scatterbrained recently. And Mrs. Appleby does not seem to be around as much, but that does allow Cecily to find something kind of strange in her desk drawer. She finds a cube that is white and snowy white, and looks like the cubes that the Rangers have for transformation with the help of the marbles. And so she finds that along with a pair of earrings that are scorpions encased in amber, which is quite strange. Uh, Cecily then takes some time to kind of notice her fellow students and notices a whole bunch of people have these kind of scorpion necklaces and amber dipped rings and earrings. At the same time, Eddie is in the now abandoned library because nobody wants to be there, and notices that people have been breaking into encyclopedia cases and doing research about things like the Amazon and women throughout history. Of course, all the encyclopedias are older and not up to date, so it's hard to tell exactly what they have been looking for, but they've been marking up these books, trying to find information that doesn't quite compute. Um, the one thing this does lead to is the group is able to find out that just a couple doors down from where Latour is at Restaurant Row, there is a girl called Jewel who is making and selling all this jewelry, all this scorpion themed jewelry. And of course, scorpions now are very touchy because Scorpina is a villain in this. But the Rangers kind of get together to go over to talk to the jewel maker, whose name is Jewel, and who talks the other version of a accent, in that Californian kind of Latour voice, in that very surfer. I don't know if it's called vocal fry, but in that very surfer way. And Jewel is very open into selling this. Like, she gets an earring for Brick because she has some pink rose, but she does notice there's been a lot of uptick in selling of scorpion themed merchandise. And the scorpion themed merchandise, it doesn't mean anything to her other than it's like people have been buying it. And she does drop that where she found the amber was on North Beach in a little cave. And there was a whole bunch of amber. There was a super big cave. That just jogs the memory for them because they've been to North Beach previously. That is where Brick entered into the shadow zone on the cliff side of the cave. And that is where he met Babu, who is this kind of spider creature. And that's also where he got his first power weapon. Um, and so they go to North Beach because there's something going on with scorpions, obviously. North Beach is a place of power within Angel Grove. Jewel notes that the cave itself is shaped like a pterodactyl, and that there's a lot of dinosaur themed stuff that seems to happen in Angel Grove, and the Rangers are very non-committal about that. But it is true, is that looking from above, if you look at like a map plan, the cave and the cliffside itself in North Beach, this rocky beach, does look like a pterodactyl. Um, and so the Rangers get there, and this is where, as the GM, I had to do stuff on the fly a little bit because I'd had a plan for where I thought they were going to go, and I'd been dropping hints about where they needed to go. But they had decided to go to the North Beach, and I'm like, I can still make this work. So as a GM, if you're listening to this, guys, I had to do this on the fly a little bit. I hope you couldn't tell. Um, but so as the GM, I brought them to this place in North Beach where I'd used how I'd crafted changes happening to the town to how changes have even affected places in like North Beach. And so the interior of the cave has actually gotten bigger than it used to be, but I still wanted it to feel claustrophobic. So I'll just kind of set the scene for you because the scene makes it easier. So originally, this battle was going to take place in a drained swimming pool of the YMCA. And so it was going to have sort of an echoey feeling to it. It was going to have a sloped, you have to go inside of a location to get to the battle. Um, and it's this really cool effect that I did where I wanted to do a battle, but I wanted this battle to have a claustrophobic feel again. I wanted this battle to be a thing where you have to decide how am I going to hit something, where it's not just a villain. And it's at this point where I think the Rangers starting to realize they haven't really seen a putty in a while. And that's going to change, not, not for the better either. So basically, what the Rangers do is they come upon the entrance to the cave, and it does slope downward. And there's a person um, at a desk that is slumped over with a white candle on the table, and the white candle is lit. Now, anyone that knows me knows that I love the candle mythology of the universe. So the candle mythology of the universe is a little different based upon who you talk to, because it kind of depends on your relationship both to Tommy and to the Boom comics for what the candle mythology means to you, but it's left kind of open to interpretation. So basically, Scorpina does this whole monologue about how Zed is very sloppy, how he's not focused, and how she is going to take over. Essentially, Scorpina is not the kind of general that Goldar is, where he's happy being a general. Scorpina's going to take over the whole operation, and is blaming Zed for a lot of things. And so, a couple of kids, not all of them, but a couple of the kids that have these scorpion themed emblems to them, and I have them as two of the people from Balkan Skulls group that were part of their gang that you only saw in a couple episodes at the beginning of the first season. I have them there. And essentially, Scorpina has them take vows and bend a knee to her and then light these dark green candles. I'm going to say they were more olive than like the green we think of the Green Ranger, but these candles essentially transform them as the Rangers watch on into these weird green putties that have hands, but these hands now have weapons attached to them. Obviously, this is quite jarring. The other problem here is that the Rangers would have element of surprise, but the tidal shark has a spiritual wave of water that comes off of it after transformation. So Brick actually activates the tidal shark. And Brick has had some trouble both with the tidal shark and with his golden scarab shield, because a lot of the villains, like the zombie grannies, aren't affected by Thunderous. So it's not affected by the sound of the cicadas as some villains would be distracted by. And so they lose the element of surprise. But that's not necessarily bad because the element of surprise doesn't help here. What it is that this is a very big sort of it looks like it could be big, but between the candle stands with the unknown lit candles, and Cecily is the one that goes after the person that's down there and realizes the person that's down there that is chained to a chair next to a typewriter that has a white candle that is currently draining life force, as Zordon will later tell them, is Dr. Amy Whitaker Scott, which is a scientist from the Natural History Museum that was hired and the Rangers saved. And she was the one that had the golden scarab that later transformed the shield. Um, this is her first appearance, I think, in the series since then at this point, at least in a bigger capacity. And even without Zordon saying it, you can kind of tell the candle is doing something to her, but Cecily acts as a protector, and Jane acts as a protector while Brick and Eddie go after both Scorpina and these two new putties that have this kind of Mason Morningstar thing going on. Um, they have pretty deadly weapons, and it's also that they don't qualify who to attack between Rangers and the couple of other people that hadn't yet transformed. Scorpina kind of laughs about the idea of she almost was able to start building an army of new putties loyal only to her. And then she and the putties disappear together. Um, she talks about how liberated she is in this evil and how much she likes it. And it's hard and it's complicated for the Rangers, but they're so focused on Amy and getting Amy to the medical chair at the command center. And the reason I kind of let that slide, as opposed to the thing where you have to have a power coin to get to the command center, is because she actually has a white marble with her that's going to go into the white marble box that was found in Mrs. Appleby's uh, Mrs. Appleby's drawer, in her contraband drawer. Um, and so at the end of the episode, we have not quite a bit of time, but I have enough time. And we've gotten to the point where Brick needs answers. I mean, they all need answers, but Brick is sort of the most vocal one about how much they don't know and how that's hurting them. I mean, I really admire that about Brick. Um, and so Brick is like, hey, I know this is going to hurt you because previously we found out that this is a War Zordon from the Yellow Ranger of the future that they contacted with the Gem of Storms. And there is PTSD, but there also is some truth the Rangers need. It's here that we find out that the smoke is from Lord Zed, um, but it is the second version of the smoke, most likely. The first version of the smoke was part of the war that Zordon fought on Eltar. Um, and what this smoke originally did was it just sort of ate. It amplified hate, it amplified greed, it amplified the darkness of the spirit, but mostly it made people disappear. It starts with kids and then it takes adults of good heart and only really leaves the darkest. Um, the first version of this on Eltar, though, wasn't really controllable. It was something that was released by Zed but couldn't be controlled by Zed. And so if this is what Zordon posits is if this is a second version of this, then we're in trouble because if he's perfected a way to actually control what this does, this is essentially like a locust, but in fog form in some ways. And so they get some information about it, which has sort of been, it could be, but Zordon, even though he's unsure, is 99% sure this is the second version of what Zed brought into the war the first time. This is a little bit of a, is this an influence of the Boom comics, kind of? But I always had this idea that Zed and Zordon had this previous relationship, so it wasn't a stretch when Zed joined Rita. That like he's like, of course, Zordon, everyone knows about Zordon, and I wanted to give them this personal back and forth that we'll see later on in the episode as well. But it's the idea that this was a lot of pain for Zordon to uncover, and we'll see in the future if there's any sort of like retribution for actually having told this truth because there is a PTSD spell on this version of Zordon, what's called a War Zordon, as opposed to a peace one, I suppose. But Zordon gives them this information. Uh, what they do with it, though, who's to say? Uh, So at the end of, and this is why I really love doing this episode now. I don't know if it's Kismet or not, but so Prairie of a Chance is the eighth episode of season two, and it's also called Prairie of a Chance because it takes place, again, the geography is a little scurry, but on the prairie land, and it takes place in a town called Saint Honore. Now, those of you tuning into Power Ranger Rise know about Saint Honore as this kind of mining museum town. So it's a living, working town where it is a museum. So this episode, episode 8 of season 2, is the first place it is introduced, and it is still a working town. At this point, as the Term Paper Trilogy is wrapping up, and everyone who has turned in their papers on times get to have a senior skip day, this is a part of the tradition that Brick didn't know about, so this was a surprise for him too, even though he has small town roots. But his parents knew about. Either they got a letter or an email or something they read. But they have to bring a lunch. They're going to have a catered dinner wherever they're going. Principal Kaplan is not going, so they don't have to worry about him bumming anybody out. Um, they do get Cecily and Jane get A's on their paper, Eddie gets a B, and Brick gets a C. But again, Brick didn't really care because he didn't actually get to do a paper on the thing he wanted to do the paper on. Um, a couple of things happen on the bus ride there because they have to get on a bus to go out of town to wherever they're going. Out of town in quotes because Angel Grove, again, is a really big space. So technically, St. Honore is of Angel Grove, but is not. It's sort of like National City is its own thing, but it's also San Diego, that kind of thing. Um, but it is at least half an hour away. It's far enough away that you can't get there by feet, essentially. Um, but two things happen to the bus. One is that it really starts to settle in that they're doing life without Quentin. Not without Quentin in the way they've forgotten about Quentin, but more like they sort of had to move on. Like the new structure of what the Rangers are doing with the boxes and the marbles is such that even though it's obvious that five are required to make this happen, that they've been doing okay without it. They still aren't in charge of anything. They're not doing anything offensive yet. It's mostly defensive, but like even with the dangers Scorpina has presented, even with the absence of what they normally expect from Rita, and not knowing much about Zed other than what they know now from Zordon about this living smoke that apparently they're getting the second version of, they're sort of moving through it a little bit. It's very hard. They're not over it. They still want to find Quentin, but no one's heard from him. He hasn't come home, and he's part of a growing list of the missing that have started to go up on like a billboard, a wall, trying to figure out where people are going because people have started to disappear just slightly. In fact, in this episode, the smoke is going to try to do a little bit of psychological terror by taking what are like wanted posters that are on the sides of buildings and um and turn them into missing posters, especially for Quentin. And Eddie and Cecily are the ones to notice this as they're talking, um, because they all have work to do while they're here in Saint Honore. Saint Honore, at this point, still has a whole bunch of robots. At this point, has a whole bunch of actors. At this point, is a working mining museum historical town. And the whole thing is that essentially everybody gets a slip of paper from Mrs. Appleby, and that's going to be the job they have for today. Job is in quotes because they have like three things they have to do. And if they don't do their job, there's no penalty, but everybody gets like an outfit to put them in the mood for the time space they're in. And of course, there was no way I was just going to have it be a normal field trip. So we're going to have fun. So bear in mind, there is this Wild West frontier slash mining museum town that exists just in the outskirts of Angel Grove, in the prairies of Angel Grove, as it is. And that's also where Power Rangers Rise is taking place. After this, in a time that seems muddled for a very good reason. So they get there. Oh no, so the second thing happens on the bus. So the first thing is Quentin. On their way there, Bulk actually apologizes. Bulk like has a tray of cookies that he swears he did not make, but he doth protest too much, and Eddie is kind of the first to call him out on that. But like it's clear that he went too far in in the last episode, and Bulk's mom actually made him apologize and had a couple other people that were there to make sure that he did it, like eavesdropping to like report back to her. Um, but Bulk and Eddie have this moment where Eddie can really see the goodness in Bulk, and it's really cool. But this sort of like apologizing is something that Bulk did not want to do and was doing it under duress. But it is Bulk taking some care and agency in his life, which is really cool. I'm a big fan of Bulk and Skull getting too mature and having a place in the tabletop game because, after all, were it not for some other reason, they would have been Power Rangers as well. Because they have Power Ranger energy, they really do, believe it or not. But so, um, Madam Blackwelder, who is the head of Saint Honoré, um, greets them where the buses stop off in the parking lot near the train station, where they will be having dinner. Um, she kind of sets the ground rules for the day and says, "Hey, I'm going to come around and check on you when you're doing your work, but everyone has a different job. There's things everybody will be doing, and everybody has cards." And so Cecily is going to be working at the piano thing in the saloon. Jane is going to be in charge of the bank, uh, because I saw the Adam Ruins Everything Wild West episode before this, so I was very much about doing historical accuracy. Also, the dice decided. So Jane gets to work at the bank. Eddie gets to work at the chapel, which will become very important, and Brick gets to be the blacksmith. So a lot of things are going to happen. So basically, they all sort of separate, and Cecily and Eddie see the trick of the wanted posters. I will say I do include in this episode at a point where when they're there long enough, because they're far enough outside of Angel Grove, they don't get the full effect of the smoke. And so they can actually, all four of them start to like feel like they can breathe a little better. It's sort of the frog in a boiling pot thing. But there is less smoke out here at this point. So Brick ends up at the blacksmith place, and his instruction is to keep the fires lit. It is a real working blacksmith place, but there's no like blacksmith on duty. They only have it on the weekends, and this is like a weekday thing. So his instruction is basically to keep the hearth burning. Jane is going to be in charge of basically learning a little bit historically about the economy of the town, but also about deciding who's going to sit at what table for their fancy train dinner, because the train's going to pull in for dinner and they're going to have a big fancy steak dinner all together. And thanks for doing the term papers, uh, which, by the way, it's free, so somebody's footing the bill for that. Um, Eddie is going to be the clergy, so he ends up having to go to the mine to check the alms box, which is going to become important. And then Cecily is at the saloon. So in game, in Power Rangers Rise, uh, the saloon is important because there's a lot of like weird, mysterious stuff that is happening there, and also because in the rooms above is where the Spirit Rangers, which are the Rangers of Saint Honoré, are staying at. And so in this universe, Wild Bill does provide soda for this because Wild Bill provides sodas for a lot of things. Um, Cecily has not a confrontation, but she finds hidden in the back of a supply closet eating a box through a box of cheese puffs, Squat, who is afraid, who is not on the run from Rita, but who is hiding and who does not want to be found. He does not want to fight the Rangers. He's not there to make trouble. He's there to hide. And so Cecily has this conversation where she finds out um, all of the allies Arita has made are running from her, assumedly. At least one is, and that she has started to change. This is where this really does flip from being Rita's season to now it's really more about Zed, because all the allies Arita has kind of started to like become so afraid or disappear, and really this is the first like honest character that allies with Rita that is now afraid and in hiding and on Earth, not on the moon, where there is this fog is on the moon as well, is what we learn from Squad. So that's sort of what Cecily gets to do. For all the people keeping up with Power Ranger Rise, the blue hair in the bottom of that box of cheese puffs that I think Mabe is currently eating is from Squat. And I have no idea if that information will ever get revealed. Like maybe the person that plays Mabe will actually listen to this episode, and it would be hilarious for that reaction to happen. Um, because in universe, I haven't decided yet what's how that information is going to get distributed if it does. But it's that same blue hair. That's what it is. Um, yeah, and so for I think Eddie's the one next who I'll give the information on. So Eddie originally wasn't sure what to do because I was like, I'm not going to make you lead a sermon. It's not that kind of thing. It's more about like keeping the place clean and you have a view of the vista. It's actually just a nice, quiet, contemplative, like decompression sort of thing is what the dice chose for him. Because any of the four could have been the clergy for this town. And so Eddie ends up, um, Eddie ends up having to go to the mine. And here again, things aren't that different from the mine at this point to the mine that Benji is going to enter. Uh, Eddie doesn't get a laugh in the back of his brain, but he does see over the edge of the abyss of the mine and down into it and notices prison-like levels. Eddie is also the first one to see the poem about sentinels and righteousness, which maybe I should actually at some point read out that poem. If we get enough interest, maybe I'll read it because all of the Rangers have seen it. But it is about this idea of sentinels are two hearts in one body. Sentinels have the righteousness and will stand against the darkness. Um, Eddie's the first person to see it, and with poor cell reception, even then, tries to make sure the other Rangers find it. The issue is that this leaves Eddie farther outside the town than anyone else. No one in this episode goes to the back of the mine, so whether or not the carnival is there, I know, but no one is going to see that sort of thing yet. The mine is the farthest edge of town they go to. Um, Eddie's not going to have much time to dwell because what happens is that the reason the fires need to stay lit becomes apparent because Brick is distracted long enough that the fire goes out, both by people that want to see Brick because Brick is in the center of town and he's still got a lot of cachet in high school, so people want to say hi because it's basically a field day and most of the teenagers are screwing around. They're not actually going to do their job. They're just going to go around in period costumes and have fun. At this point, there are robots that are playing like secondary side characters, like not villains, but more like cattle rustlers. There's one out on the ranch drive. There is like a thing that could have happened if the episode had ran longer, where that would have happened, where like a bad guy robot would have came into town still as a robot. But because the fires went out and Brick got distracted and couldn't keep them lit, which was by design, by the way. The dice agreed with me on that. Yeah. The fires go out and all the robots change. And Jane, who is sitting with Madam Blackwelder, because Madam Blackwelder is visiting with Jane, Jane gets to watch her transform into a Minotaur. And this is the point where everything that's been happening with the Sentinels is going to come together because now they have all the boxes. Now they have all the marbles for all the marbles. So what happens is that uh, Jane is able to get out of the way enough that the Minotaur Black Welder crashes through the wall and into the street. So it gives Jane a chance to transform and regroup and let the others know what's going on. Um, Brick is confronted with these robots that are now filling with black smoke because he let the fires go. Eddie is fairly far away. Cecily is between the two and sort of has to decide if she's going to help Brick against the robots or if she's going to help Jane against the Minotaur and sort of has to split the difference. Eventually, they're all going to come together. What happens is that Eddie has a lot more success with the title shark. Eddie sort of intuitively, I'm not sure if he liked it or not, but Eddie sort of intuitively understood the whirlpool attack, which lets you do a grid blink teleport move and then a punch. It worked better with Eddie than it had been working with Brick. There was something more aligned, which surprised me, which I kind of liked the surprise. Um, but you know how in Power Ranger Rise there was one robot with a weapon that produced smoke bullets? Imagine that, but imagine eight of them at essentially full power and a Minotaur. Um, but of course, the robots are a little putty-like in that they have lower hit points. They're a little less dangerous because the robot bullets, again, shoot bullets. But the Rangers transformed when they're hit with them feel the fear of being hit with the bullet, but like don't react by fleeing the scene because they didn't get hit enough to it. They had a lot of fun with the robot cowboys. And that was just one-on-one combat for a bit, essentially getting Eddie getting through the line and Cecily coming up, essentially getting to a point where all that's left is the Minotaur. And this is a victory they're never able to recreate. But what they do is, as Eddie comes down, the boxes are in proximity enough to make a circle, and they're able to make a circle of healing where the Sentinels are able to clear out the smoke, and Madame Blackwelder is healed of being a Minotaur. And all but one of the smoke robots, because there was one that got away, all fall. They get Madam Blackwelder to the first aid tent, and of course, Angel Grove kids being Angel Grove kids, they still have their steak dinner. But this is the first time, and I think the only time, where we actually get to see the Sentinels do the thing they're supposed to do. Again, you can fill the missing Fifth Ranger need because the golden box and the golden marble just kind of float there. But there is joy for a moment. There is hope for a moment. And that was what the Term Paper Trilogy was for and was all about, is this bridge from what was in season one, from that whole very big, heavy school arc that we sort of had to get through, to this idea of moving on, this idea that Rita is still around, but there's something even darker as a threat, and that it's not that Zordon is hiding information, it's that some information is too painful to even impart in a way that sometimes even manifests magically. Um, but that was Prairie of a Chance in Saint Honoré. And so I'm chuckling now because obviously Power Ranger Rise takes place in Saint Honoré in the future, but in the present, in season two, episode 8, while the fog is taking over Angel Grove, Saint Honoré, in theory, is this thriving mining museum town with something kind of dark in it somewhere. Just not something anyone has quite seen yet. So that was the Term Paper Trilogy part two, we'll say, of season two. There's going to be a third part, which will be the other 4 or 5 episodes altogether, because a lot of you have been waiting for this for a while, or maybe you've been wanting to know more about the extended universe. And I'm sorry I don't have the original episodes to share with you. Things have happened. I would like to say that evil got into the computers and tried to erase the goodness that happened. Um, but I really want to tell the story and to honor what the Rangers have done, because all my Rangers are still out there, even Luna. And Luna has a job yet that they don't even know. By the way, this is the portion of the series where in Centurion Ridge, you see Goldar flying over there. So this is the part where he's on the vacation. Either right now or in season three at some point, but right now definitely. I don't think in season three. So I am so excited to share the rest of the story with you. Um, share the story of Jane, Brick, Cecily, Eddie, and Quentin, and Luna, and continue to tell the story of this world that means so much to me to build. Not just as a jam, not just as a Power Ranger fan, but something that sees what the Power Ranger does and what the Power Ranger mean, and be able to accentuate this idea of this manifestation that's coming of age, the story about community, the story about what makes a place special and what happens if a place is special. Because all of this starts for me with Angel Grove. And where it starts at the beginning is where it will also end, one way or another. It's Term Paper Trilogy, and I'll see you next time for the rise of Zed.